You really couldn't go anywhere in the early 2000s without hearing people talk about The Ring. It was this huge phenomenon. While already being a pretty big hit in Japan, reached international attention with the US produced remake. By that point, everyone was all hyped up about the movie and started becoming scared of their TVs. Since then, a generation of horror fans have placed this as their favorite horror movie for its uniqueness, tell that to Cronenberg, and subtlety. The reality is, American horror films were growing pretty boring at this time, with played out slashers and predictable formulas. Now, great movies were still being made, but American audiences weren't accustomed to foreign horror stories. Japanese horror is typically scarier in ways that Western audiences aren't used to. The Japanese ghost will be present and contemplative, rather than the thrills of a haunted amusement ride that American horror films rely on. Now, as big as a film as it was, how many actually read the book that originated the story? Some of you may be even thinking, wait a minute, the movie about a VHS tape that kills people was originally a book? Yes, and surprisingly, it works. Ring was written by Koji Suzuki and published in 1991. Suzuki is an established author and well known for his works in the horror genre. He was one of the most important writers of the 90s horror wave. That said, the original Ring novel isn't super horror. Not in the sense that you may expect having seen the films. It's more thriller mystery with horror elements thrown into it. Mystery is a big part of this story. Really, a lot of it plays out like a detective story. What's really interesting is that out of all the adaptations made based on this book, only one really tackled it in this manner. And it's arguably the worst one, but also one of the most interesting interpretations. In this video, we'll be examining all the different films that have adapted the novel, meaning only the first. Sequels are a whole separate beast worth their own discussion. This video will purely focus on the Ring films based on the book by Koji Suzuki. And after we're done breaking down all the films, we'll do a little ranking to see which film is supreme. And let me clarify this, as I must every time I discuss a book to film adaptation. Adaptations are a tricky thing. To put a book onto screen is to translate it to film language. Sometimes things get lost in translation. Sometimes producers force changes for their own agendas. Sometimes stories just don't work on screen. And sometimes the most awful adaptations still make for a great film or series. Just something to keep in mind when looking at these films. There have been 4 major film adaptations, not including TV shows and radio dramas or manga. The first film was a made-for-TV, low-budget, late-night special from 1995. Then there was the Hideo Nakata film from 98, the one most of you know, the South Korean version, The Ring Virus from 1999, and the 2002 hit Ring by Gore Verbinski. What's interesting about these adaptations is that almost all of them are from different countries and offer different interpretations of the book. Kinda. In actuality, all the films are just basically following Nakata's 98 feature, the one you all know, and sort of scrapped the idea of doing their own thing or following the book, and decided to just keep the changes that that film made while switching up the endings a little bit. We'll go more into detail with that as we go along. The novel does have some major differences I should note. The big one being that the main character, Asakawa, was originally a male in the story, and Ryuji was not their ex-lover or ex-husband, but their best friend from high school who scares the hell out of him. I found Asakawa in the novel to be painfully average, and that was the point. Kinda like Parasite Eve. You'll see a lot of Japanese horror put some emphasis on the common man. I'm not really sure how many of you realize just how awful being a salary worker in Japan actually is. It's rough. Asakawa, to a degree, is relatable to the average reader. Think of it like the Silent Hill approach, where the characters were supposed to be common enough for us to put ourselves in their shoes. Nakata thought that changing Asakawa into a female would make the story more interesting. And he's right, but that also kind of defeats the purpose of the character in the original source material. It also, interestingly enough, takes away all the uniqueness of the relationship with Ryuji, but we'll get into that. The only film to keep the characters remotely the same was 1995's Ring, the first adaptation. This film is the closest to the source material, but unfortunately, it's very rough around the edges. Incredibly ambitious, sure, but rough nonetheless. The film opens almost exactly like the book, although it does ignore some of the novel's westernization concerns. The novel describes all these tired, old, uniform condominium buildings, and then there's Tomoko's home, which is new, modern, and western, and lonely. Tomoko is alone studying in this intense heat wave. Heat, of course, is used to give a claustrophobic feeling, as well as a sense of familiarity for those who have suffered Japan's heat. She goes for a drink of soda, feeling an extreme weight of uneasiness bearing down on her. She then dies after seeing something horrifying reflected in her glass. The story cuts to Asakawa getting into a taxi. In the novel, this happens a little bit later, but the film actually was pretty clever in combining two scenes together to give the story a better tempo and to better personally connect Asakawa to the story. He witnesses another teenager die in a similar manner as Tomoko. He later learns from his wife that her niece, Tomoko, died at the same exact time. Asakawa is a reporter but got demoted to an editor after making a story about UFOs that turned out to be a hoax. So he already has this interest and experience with stories revolving around the unknown. That said, he isn't really that interested or upset about the death of his wife's niece. He just smells the potential for a good story, leading his attention to the resort, South Hakone Land Lodge. So far, this film has been near exact to the novel, which also makes it easier for me to point out the major differences with the other films when we get to them. While this story has been pretty accurate, there are some notable differences to point out. For one, Asakawa's wife is pregnant instead of having already given birth to the daughter, who should be an infant by this point. I guess this was a cheaper alternative than hiring an infant actor. All in all, this prevents us from some stupid filler that the other movies opted for, so it's not that big of a deal. The infant's role is to be an infant who does give a single moment of foreshadowing when being scared by a mask of a literal demon. The reasoning behind Asakawa is, how can a baby who thinks that this Godzilla figure is cute know that this mask of a demon is something to be scared of, and thus sees it as a bad omen? I mean, sure, I guess. Another thing, Asakawa's a little too suave here. Maybe because the actor is also more handsome than the character is supposed to be. He also goes around like this cool investigator doing his own detective work. He has obvious spotlights put onto him that still separates him from the common man theme. But he's the protagonist, so let's make sure he feels like that. Asakawa makes his way to Hakone and after some goofy Dutch camera angles, finds the tape. Something that bothered me is that Asakawa believed that these kids were originally killed by some sort of disease or virus in the room that they were at. So in the book, he goes in there with a face mask and gloves and investigates the room, checking for anything weird. Every movie version of this character just doesn't care, and I don't know if that's dumbing them down or if the writers just didn't care. The most important part of every Ring adaptation is the tape. The tape is the thing that people usually remember. The tape, we learn, is created by Sadako and her psychic ability known as Ninsha, which allows her to project images onto a videotape, or people's minds. The images are the key to the story. Those who watch the tape have been cursed by Sadako and only have a week to break the curse or they die. Sadako is a form of Onryo. These are Japanese vengeful female spirits that have been used in horror stories for centuries. The tale of Oiwa is one of the most famous examples of Onryo. The story details a young woman who was mutilated in life after her husband grew tired of her, and then took her own life, pledging to haunt him for the rest of his. Several stories have been inspired by this, and Ring is no exception. But Ring does something even more clever. They take the story of Oiwa, or the Onryo, and modernize it by connecting her haunting abilities with modern technologies, both using it as symbolic for the dangers that come with modern technologies, updating this age-old tale for modern audiences. So the tape is comprised of memories, emotions, and even predictions by Sadako. The whole point of the novel is to unravel what these messages mean and how Asakawa can break the curse to save his life and his family's. But I'm just gonna go ahead and do it for you. The novel obviously had to go into intense detail to really give you the impact of these images and the same feelings of anxiety as Asakawa. He is living the images, feeling what Sadako feels. This kind of plays on feminology, if you will. This is a film theory which focuses on how the images we see on film play with our senses. For example, if you perhaps see a brick wall on screen, you might almost feel the texture of the bricks on your fingertips because at some point in your life you have felt it before. That is a very simplified way of breaking that down. But we could say that Sadako forces that to the extreme with her tape. None of the films really play on this except for this one, and I appreciate the 95 film for attempting this. Here the film uses colored lighting and choppy cutting to give this really over-exaggerated sense of intensity, though the sound of him gagging really ruins it. And it does this. Camera trick. Neat. The film is trying really hard to give the impression that Asakawa feels what he sees on screen. For instance, he holds his hands out after seeing the image of birth, which does make sense in the novel, being that he was already a father and has experienced this before in life, and this actually was described in the book as well. The first image of the tape shows a volcanic explosion, one that is supposed to roar so loud as if we were actually there. Dual meaning here, most likely Sadako's prediction of the eruption of Mount Mihara, which came true, also the place where her mother committed suicide. The flames of the volcano mold into people watching aggressively at the viewer. Sadako's mother was to demonstrate her psychic abilities by predicting the result of these rolling dice. A pivotal moment for Sadako, who witnessed her mother and biological father be branded as frauds. The kanji here is Yama, most likely for Yamamura, Sadako's surname, which in itself is a clue as it means mountain village. The next image is Sadako's grandmother, who we later learn is speaking in a Oshima Izu dialect. There's a flash of a face, not too sure who, although it could just be a demonic image collective of the men who have wronged Sadako. They really wanted you to know that Asakawa here was experiencing all these hateful accusations. It's actually kind of a cool effect. The baby is most likely a memory of Sadako's brother who died while still an infant. Reproduction and paternity are major themes of this story. Sadako herself desires to reproduce, but cannot due to her biological makeup that will be explored later on. The TV here is most likely recalling Sadako practicing her psychic abilities, which was discovered by a male member of her acting troupe near the end of her life. Kanji of another piece of Sadako's name, Sada, which a clue for the viewer who has no idea what's going on. More pieces of her memories of her grandmother warning her of sea demons, and crowds verbally assaulting Yamamura family, revving up the intensity of the situation. The acting troupe member, Shigemori, who Sadako killed, and Jotaro, the doctor who raped and infected Sadako with smallpox and technically killed her by throwing her down the well. That's right, Sadako in the original lore was a sexual assault victim who was murdered. The well didn't kill her right away, she slowly starved to death, but that was enough time for her to make her Onryo curse. The rest are images of her time down the well, I really like what they did with the font here. This is where Sadako explains how to break the curse, and it should feel otherworldly. For what it's worth, as choppy as it is pretty damn close to the book. After the tape plays, Asakawa receives a phone call, and yes, I'm sure many of you are making the 7 days joke, but that didn't actually happen in the original, or any of them until the American one, actually. The phone simply rumbled as if we were drowning listening to it, as the tape itself was supposed to explain the whole 7 days thing. As absurd as it is, he knows damn well that he's been cursed, and some kids recorded over the only way to break that curse. So now he has 7 days to discover what the hell to do. Oh, and my copy of this movie still has the commercials from its broadcast. That's kinda cool, actually. And convenient timing, that threw me off. The desperate situation has led Asakawa to his only real friend that he hasn't seen in a while, Ryuji. Oh boy, Ryuji is a beast of a character to analyze and discuss. Not so much the narcoleptic ones in the movies, but the one in the book. He is a doozy of a character. Ryuji is not a likable person, but if you share his twisted sense of humor, you may love him. I'm not gonna dance around it. He's a bad person, but a greatly written character for such an unlikable bastard. Ryuji and Asakawa have such a fascinating dynamic. So much more interesting than that divorce subplot. They spend so much of their time together sipping whiskey and talking about their perspectives on the world. Well, mostly Ryuji. The difference in ideals and personalities make for great scenes of tension between the two. They have existential discussions about humanity, most of which frighten and disgust Asakawa, also leave him mulling around some of those ideas. These dialogue exchanges are some of the best parts of the book. Asakawa feels incredibly uncomfortable with Ryuji, but he is also his best bet for survival. This version of Ryuji is pretty condensed, not that a single movie adaptation has ever done him right. In this movie, he's kinda sluggish, but still bears the same dark sense of humor and some of the existential discussions. Ryuji has no fear, nor does he scoff or laugh at Asakawa for fearing the tape. He simply says, "Let me watch it too," and immediately he believes it and explains that things in life are more exciting with a deadline. This version also includes Mai, Ryuji's student, who has a very close relationship with him. The character is actually incredibly important in the sequel, but not as much here. But it's very important to include them nonetheless for future of the story. What I really appreciate about this film is how Asakawa and Ryuji are doing the investigative work and begin to unravel the story of Sadako. What a good use of this film's time. In the novel, he's far too busy or tired from work that he doesn't really get to spend time with his family. Another unfortunate case of the Japanese salaryman's life. As Asakawa only has a few days to live, he begins to realize just how precious every second is as they pass, thus tries to spend more time with his wife. The story gets extra tense when Asakawa's pregnant wife watches the tape. Asakawa was desiring to save his own life for his family, but also was wrestling with the fact that he may not be able to, and a part of him was already prepared for the fact that he may die. He was somewhat content and was going to make preparations for his family after his death. But now his family has seen the tape and their lives are also at stake. His desire to solve the curse has become far more a necessity. So we go to Oshima. They learn more about Sadako, a young odd girl who was born between her psychic mother and doctor looking to exploit her skills. After a failed exhibit, they were branded as frauds, ruining their reputations and careers. This pushes Sadako's mother to commit suicide. I really enjoy the film's work here on the discussions between Asakawa and Ryuji. This scene does so well to build up Asakawa's anxiety and tension, which is rivaled by Ryuji's cool and calm demeanor. It may be just me, but there's something sinister about the way that Ryuji is captured here. Ironic for someone who's trying to give an uplifting speech. This is some surprisingly pleasant cinematography from this project. I also have no idea if this video scratch is from the original film, or is it just a crappy recording I got. Asakawa investigates the acting troupe that Sadako was part of, learning her having a sexual relationship with her father. Her father? What the fuck? That's not in the book, or any version. What the hell were they thinking with that? The biggest drawback from this movie is how amped up the sexual nature of the story is. I mean, sure, there are elements there and themes, but it's exaggerated here, almost smutty. Ugh. The investigation leads them to learning that a young doctor had raped Sadako and threw her down the well, as I talked about before. It seems most movie adaptations wanted to steer away from the lore point that Sadako was a sexual assault victim, so that they could do some weird filicide plot lines instead. Even some variations keep Sadako as a child, whereas most stories she died when she was 18. This film really exaggerates it, but in the source material they make explicit that Jotaro's actions were not his own, but that he was also infected with smallpox and was being influenced by Sadako's psychic powers. At this point they also learn that Sadako is intersex, which is another plot point that most adaptations seem to ignore. Having both male and female genitalia, Sadako is unable to reproduce. Asakawa and Ryuji deduce that Sadako's curse must be broken in the old school fashion way of laying the unsettled spirit to rest. They go to the lodge and recover her remains. Throughout the story, Asakawa, who could not understand Sadako's experiences, starts to develop a strange connection with the poor girl, having lived her life through her curse and sharing these experiences. The film tries to actualize this connection by having him see her in the well. In actuality, he's hugging her corpse. Asakawa is still alive after his deadline and assumes that they had broken the curse. They return Sadako to her home for a proper burial, and the film takes some creative liberties with Ryuji's death. There's something really odd about him addressing Sadako so calmly in this situation that just fits the character perfectly, except that it's the complete opposite of what's supposed to happen. Ryuji, in fact, experiences a sense of fear. Before Sadako makes her presence, he feels fear, something Ryuji almost never feels. As he begins to have a heart attack, he spends his last moments trying to figure out what the curse actually needed to be broken, and tries to call Mai to inform her. Here, Mai is actually in the scene to witness everything. The film plays the scene far more calmly and oddly grotesquely, and there's nudity. Ryuji deduces that reproduction is the solution. The film presents that visually by having Sadako holding a child. It's interesting that Sadako was not present to us in this manner in the novel, but every single film adaptation has her present for Ryuji's death. Asakawa puts together Ryuji's last clues, realizing that creating another tape and spreading the curse to another is the key for survival. Ring is a never-ending cycle of Sadako's curse. The film ends with Asakawa walking down the street with a bright-ass red shirt that is completely devoid of the incredibly sinister and foreboding ending of the novel. I actually still remember how I felt reading that last passage. I was so struck that I immediately hunted down and ordered a copy of the sequel novel, which wasn't as easy to get back then as it is today now that they're finally being reprinted. So the first Ring is pretty bad. Which is sad to say for the only one that really captured the source material, but even then it didn't do that so well. I wouldn't really recommend this film unless you're just really fascinated by it. It's not perfect at all, but it is kind of somewhat faithful a little bit. But there's so much extra crap in this movie that really muddies the themes of the book that it's adapting. Come a few years later, 1998 would see one of the most groundbreaking horror films of all time. I will always respect it for the impact it had. Director Hideo Nakata and screenwriter Hiroshi Takahashi read the novel and watched the film that we had previously discussed as inspiration for their own vision. The most major change they made was changing Asakawa to a female, and it does add on to the themes of maternity, making the connection with Sadako more maternal, although either way, Asakawa was a parent. All in all, this change isn't really that big of a deal, nor is it irksome at all compared to other changes that were made. In reality, two of the biggest problems in this film are related to these two, but we'll get into that. The film opens like the previous versions with Tomoko, except this time she has a friend over. The themes of modernity and westernization aren't as present in this opening, as the buildings were replaced with the title card over the ocean, because Sadako and the sea monster, there's some Western branded snacks lying around. I guess there's that. The claustrophobic heat wave doesn't seem nearly as present either. Now, this movie makes a major change that I despise greatly. By making this a sleepover or whatever, we have Tomoko and her friend talking about the tape. In the first 2 minutes of the opening, they've already explained to us what we should be investigating in the story. What the story is about. They've already spoiled it for us. Yeah, get ready for a lack of mystery in these versions. These movies are great at just giving you everything in exposition. I'll say it before someone in the comments gets mad, but yes, there is power in rumors, and spreading of rumors of the tape adds to the effect of the curse. More kids will talk about it, and everyone will be watching the tape. It's a sort of double-edged sword here, I guess. You get the main plot thrown to you in your face with no subtlety whatsoever from the start, but at least there's some reasoning behind it. I still would have preferred if the opening was more intense, anxious, and even played like a horror movie, like the source material. Well, we got this. So the whole common man or common person story is thrown out the window. Asakawa is now a cooler journalist who is already investigating the story, and the idea of the video that kills people is already known to her. Asakawa's infant daughter is now an older son named Yoichi, who unfortunately eats up too much plot time with filler. Not as bad as the American movie, though. I get it, the child gave a dark omen in the book, but did that really mean that they needed to also have a psychic connection? Honestly, just how common are these powers in this universe? It should be striking the different approaches that these films took. The original was loud and very much in your face with everything, whereas this film actually feels like a movie. It's incredibly well shot. It's beautiful, in fact. Well paced and very quiet. So quiet that, unfortunately, it actually resorts to jump scares. That's a real shame. 20 minutes in and we get to the tape. So far, the basic plot has pretty much played the same up until this point. Reporter's niece died along 3 other kids at the same time. The motivations are slightly different here, although I don't think we should dismiss the fact that there is journalistic ambition as well for Asakawa here. But here she does seem somewhat sad that her niece died, versus the novel who really just didn't give a shit. I really hate this photograph bit. I really do. I can't remember if it was Goosebumps or someone's done this before. It's been done for stories where it actually mattered. Here it's just additional details that don't do anything for the story. It's just a lack of confidence in enforcing that the tape has real power by needing this extra layer. I don't even really like the phone call aspect either, and that actually was in the original. The tape and the tape alone should be powerful enough to do all the convincing you need to know that this is real. Still no mask or gloves. I wonder if these 30 seconds could have been utilized better. Bro, they got the whole Indiana Jones trilogy in there. Setting that close to those old CRTs is not good for your eyes. Anyway, tape time. The opening image is Sadako's POV from the well. Afterwards is the famous mirror scene. I could explain this, but first I should inform you that the concrete explanation of the scene isn't until Ring 2, which is a remake of the sequel Razin, which is actually based off of the second book. So, yeah, this isn't explained until the sequel. The whole point of the story is unraveling Sadako's story. No one cares. So Sadako's mom's mental state is deteriorating, and Sadako thinks, hey, why not pull a prank on my old, mentally unstable mom by using my psychic powers to reverse the mirrors. Yeah, that's cute and all, but doesn't really do anything at all. And instead of seeing the eruption, we see the word eruption. That's because in this version, it wasn't Sadako who predicted it, it was her mother. This is actually pieces of a news article about the incident from Sadako's memories, I guess. Oh hey, look, Pyramid Head. So this is Ryuji in the future, kinda. Supposedly, if you break this clip down, you can hear the Oshima Izu dialect in the background. Sada kanji, like in the original, and the well. Yeah, I never really found this version to be creepy at all, even when I first saw it. The only real parts that were effective are the towel man and the hold on the well. Although it still does possess some feeling of a supernatural element, it's very much lacking in the power of the tape. Even worse is Asakawa's reaction to the tape. Here she just has some lazy hypnotic reaction. Subtlety is a good thing, which works in most cases, but this is supposed to be something shocking and frightening, not something that someone would make film school jokes about. People praise this movie for its tension, and I find it incredibly lacking. Phone call meme, time to go get Ryuji. So I talked about Ryuji in the novel, and how he's an unlikable bastard, but is also an incredibly well-written character, a wild card who could come off as unpredictable. One who treats the whole scenario as a game. I can't wait to see how they interpret him for this big budget film. Look, I really do like Hiroyuki Sanada. I do. I think he's a great actor. I think he's incredible. And he slays the haircut in this movie. He looks mighty damn cute here and all. But what the fuck did they do to his character? He is so goddamn boring. They made him stoic. The complete opposite of what his character was supposed to be. He's just a snarky, uninterested father who really just doesn't even feel like he wants to be in this movie. Oh, and he's psychic in this one, because why not? Why not make Asakawa a psychic while we're at it too? Hell, make Yoshino a psychic. Fuck it, make this bird a psychic. God, this movie has great cinematography though. Oh, that looks so good. Oh yeah, the phone call part is only supposed to happen at the lodge or something like that. That's actually an important lore point. This is a weird Ryuji, man. Asakawa uses her journalism experience, I guess, to deduce that the video wasn't made by a camera. And in fact, it seems that Asakawa is doing all the work here, which is a complete reversal of the cool-headed Ryuji. Asakawa is now the collective one. And there's Mai, who is now a little creepy and seemingly jealous of Asakawa. Asakawa decides to spend her last days with her family, while Ryuji tells her that they need to go to Oshima Izu. We're halfway through the movie already, by the way. Yoichi watches the tape, and Asakawa is now pressed to break the curse. Ryuji sure isn't adding any more existentialism to these dialogue exchanges anymore, is he? They spend a night in Oshima, and then Ryuji talks to an old guy, Sadako's uncle, using psychic powers to get all the exposition for the movie. I'm not joking. I kid you not. All the exposition right there. So after the press called Sadako's mom a fraud, Sadako just didn't sit there and take that shit like the OG. She straight up murdered a journalist on the spot. That's a fundamental difference between the film's version of Sadako and the book. The book, Sadako is actually a sympathetic character conditioned by the events of her life. Sadako in the movie was always kind of freaky, and she never really had a chance to do anything because she was so bizarre that her dad immediately dumped her in a well. Information also given to us in a psychic flashback. Asakawa again figures out that the well must have been at the lodge, and Sadako's uncle, in an oddly badass fashion, drives him out of Oshima during a storm. Much like the previous film, the well scene plays out almost exactly like the source material, except this one actually handled it a bit better, specifically with finding Sadako's corpse. Instead of the weird hugging her spirit thing, they chose to just show her hair as the guise, and it works. They also handled Ryuji's death better. Although the film made a major change. One that would be a defining moment for horror history. Sadako coming out of the TV. Yes, let's just go even more Cronenberg with it. This is not in the novel. This was a change that was made by Nakata. And it's so iconic. It is probably the best change that they made. It's not just one of the most iconic images or concepts of modern horror, it's really effective. And it really brings to life the prospect of modernity or modern technologies clashing with tradition and the traditional ghost stories to a new visual extreme. It's incredibly cumulative of the novel's themes, a lot of which the film had ignored up until this point. And it just looks so cool. As Ryuji dies, Yoichi draws what seems to be a ring. Ooh. The ending plays out like you'd expect. Mai finds Ryuji. Asakawa pieces together that reproduction is the key, which doesn't really mean as much here because of certain Sadako lore points that have been ignored. She has Yoichi create a copy and heads to her dad's home, prepared to kill him to save Yoichi. Or have him also make a copy. Either way, the cycle continues. Ringu, or Ring 98, is a really good horror film that does a better job adapting its source material with just some really bizarre changes. They neglected most of Sadako's backstory, nor have they acknowledged the science of the ring, that it was actually a virus, psychic curse infused with smallpox that was given to her during the unfortunate incident. Balance of fantasy and reality that's so absurd that it's almost plausible. And Ryuji is just so incredibly flat. Changing is one thing, but changing them to do absolutely nothing for the story is just insane. That's just insane. All that aside, 90s kids really love this movie and will praise it as the granddaddy of J-horror films. As a J-horror fan, I oppose that statement greatly, but it did open a lot of doors, especially in growing an interest outside of Japan, which brings us to the next film adaptation. South Korea's Ring Virus. Isn't that appropriately titled? I'd known about this version existing for years, but I hadn't actually gotten to see it until around a year or so ago. Realistically, the story behind this movie is more interesting than the film itself. It came out in 1999, a year after the Nakata film. At this time, South Korea actually had a ban on Japanese media imports. The whole thing goes back to the Anti-National Behavioral Act that came about post-World War II, where South Korea made any association with Japan illegal. Now, the ban on media had actually been lifted when the film was set to be released. The whole point of this movie being made was because The Ring was really popular, and South Korea was making their own version for South Korean audiences who couldn't watch the Japanese version. But since that ban had lifted, the point wasn't as necessary, but the film was already near completion, so they went ahead and finished and released it. Now, this version claimed to be a straight-up adaptation of the book. That's bullshit, because most of the changes from the Nakata film are still present in this version as well. For simplicity of comparisons, I'll keep addressing the characters with their novel names, even though everyone here had been renamed in Korean. The opening of the movie is the best part of it. It again neglects the opening themes, but it does work on a horror level, being one of the few moments of the story that's actually supposed to be pretty scary. It's rather tense and does well to play on Tomoko's anxiety here, although they did kind of drop the ball on her death. Why is this a trend? They found a way to incorporate both of the teens' deaths simultaneously without cutting to each other's perspective, which was pretty cool. Now, remember how the previous movie just completely ignored Sadako's gender? Well, this movie actually opens up with some interesting discussions on gender and sexuality. I wonder if they'll follow up on that. This film keeps Asakawa as a single mother in this version, with Yoichi being a girl, like the novel, although still much older than an infant. Interesting. That said, she pretty much plays the same role as Yoichi in the Nakata film, just not as present. I actually like this from the TV POV camera angle. We have this child hypnotized by the television while the adults are talking about some serious stuff, almost like Sadako peering out or the impression she left behind after killing the Tomoko character. Oh look, it's the exact same thing as the '98 film. The rest of the film plays out near identical, until we get to the Ryuji character. He's certainly different here. Yeah, it's like each film just wants to make him even lazier. Unlike every other version of the story, in this one, Ryuji and Asakawa have no previous ties, and this is their first meeting. For some reason, this feels more like L meeting the police for the first time, or Hannibal Lecter. Instead of just being a university professor, he's kind of a combination of Ryuji and the protagonist of the sequel novel, Rasen, or Spiral. That character is Mitsuo, a coroner who investigates the whole ring incident after performing an autopsy on his old friend and colleague, Ryuji. I don't really think I like this version of Ryuji, but he's oddly accurate at times. It's an incredibly weird presentation of this character.
섹스는 한 1년 정도 못 해봤을 테고.
정확히 1년하고 6개월이에요. 됐어요?
Huh. What the hell? Are we back in the 95 film with these angles? Well, here's more of the same movie we've already seen before. Let's just get to the tape. This hurts my eyes. This one is hard to break down. The whole thing is just blue. It's just blue. The whole thing is bluer than the American remake. We see the grandma and I think Sadako's POV, water. I think those are the people calling her a fraud. I had to take a Tylenol after staring at these images for too long. I appreciate that they at least got the ending of the tape correctly, and that has to be the worst reaction to the tape by far. Of course, the rest plays out like you would expect. Asakawa shows Ryuji the tape, and what the hell, this movie is just uninspired. It's not as bad as the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, but damn, this is just not interesting, especially if you've already seen any other version of the movie. It's trying to hybrid Nakata's movie with the novel, which just goes to show both of those iterations work on their own rights, not so much together. Do one or the other, cause damn is this muddied. Well, they go to this story's version of Oshima and do more investigating. And we actually get to see Yoshino doing his own investigation on the acting troupe, so that was a nice addition. Apparently, Sadako killed the acting troupe guy for peeping on her in the shower instead of because she saw her practicing her ninja on the TV. The rest of the film plays out exactly as you would expect it to. Well, except that they actually included the Jotaro character this time, who in this version is her half-brother that sexually assaults her? What? Why? Well, they got the smallpox and Sadako being intersex in this version. Asakawa finds Sadako's corpse, gives it a hug, and they go up. Ryuji dies, and they have Sadako come out of the TV, another thing they ripped from the Nakata film, and it looks not great. The ending is identical. Although I should note that this image is exactly how it's described in the novels, so that's neat. The South Korean Ring film is kind of a waste of time. It's not a very unique film that forces elements together that just don't really work. It's also hard to be super analytical on what's basically a complete rehash of what we've already seen before. Which brings us to the one you all know and love, 2002's Ring. So what happens when a foreign film is successful? Hollywood wants to remake it. It may not be as original, but it will have a bigger budget, which really isn't always a good thing. It's also a stretch to call the 2002 remake an adaptation of the novel, because I don't think anyone involved with this movie had actually read it. They were simply going off of the Nakata film from '98, although they do acknowledge it in the ending credits. That said, it's a weird line, but we'll include it here because I'll be killed if I don't. There's a certain generation that's developed quite a fondness of this film. This was my introduction to the franchise, as was for many outside of Japan. This also opened a series of American remakes of J-horror films, some of which are the most god-awful things ever put to screen. Thankfully, Ring is actually pretty good. Well, in its craftsmanship. I was never a big fan of this film, even before I knew anything about the franchise. And back in the 2000s, I always found it incredibly lackluster compared to The Grudge, which at the time was a movie that actually scared me as a kid. Unfortunately, now I'm horribly desensitized to horror due to my youth. Even today, I'm just so desperate for something to give me a scare. So by the time I saw The Ring, I actually caught it on live television, and it didn't do anything for me. The whole legacy behind the film wasn't the movie itself or its content. It was the rumor of the tape and the power behind that. Kids used to joke around about Sadako coming out of the TV to scare each other at sleepovers, or as we called her, the Ring Girl, just like how kids would call Kayako the Grudge. I don't really know how that makes sense, but that's what we did back then. That was the real power behind this movie. Which leads me to the opening. Well, they got the image of the lone house, although it's actually the opposite thematically. I despise this opening. I hate it. I hate it so much. Nobody talks like this. Also, every line that she just said is a direct attack on the purpose of the story. The whole anti-media tech talk just soils what the book was doing. Congrats. And just like the Nakata film, only a couple minutes in and you have effectively removed the suspense of the story. Thanks. I realize this is a Gore Verbinski film, but the color grading just isn't very appealing. I get we're going for the sea monster theme and we're trying to make the whole joke about Seattle being wet. The rest of the scene plays off like the 98 version. The TV effect here is handled a bit better, and it's the saving grace of this opening sequence. Oh yeah, for some reason in this one, Sadako makes people make a silly face when they die. Alright. And she leaves a puddle behind because sea monster. Oh, if you thought Yoichi took too much screen time in the original, baby, this movie is chock full of filler on this damn kid. Again, they didn't read the book, but they saw Yoichi in the movie and thought, well hey, The Sixth Sense was a major success. Let's just do another creepy psychic kid and have him eat up a good chunk of the main story time. That's a great idea, guys. Asakawa is now played by Naomi Watts. Supposedly Gore didn't want any big names attached to this film, and you know, say what you will about this movie, Naomi Watts is incredible in the role. I don't exactly agree with everything they did with the character, but my god, she owns it. She is incredibly convincing in this role as the independent single mother reporter who isn't fully aware of the fact that she isn't always there for her son and still has a lot to learn. An effective way to incorporate aspects of the negligent Asakawa of the original and keeping the paternal themes of the book. It's actually effective for both Americanizing and keeping up with the slightly more modern time than the 10 years prior that the novel was written. For some strange reason, I find it more effective here in the American film than the Japanese one. But there's still more surprises to come. I was actually mulling around the idea of converting the novel to the United States, and Seattle is the most appropriate setting. And being a fictional film, you can obviously play around with the environment a little. The film did so with its version of Oshima, but at the same time, had the potential to incorporate the volcanic history, but chose not to. Much like the original, Asakawa, or Rachel, learns that several other teens have died like her niece. Unlike the 98 film, Rachel is not already investigating these rumors, as they apparently aren't as widespread as they were in the Japanese film, which I appreciate as it does keep some mystery involved for the protagonist. Rachel's investigation leads her to the Lodge Resort, which is not really a resort in this one, but same purpose, I assume. Also, what a VHS collection we have here. Look at that. You're the hunter from the future. You've gotta be shitting me. That's actually crazy. This collection looks about as good as my local thrift stores. They didn't really hide the tape here either. It's kind of just in your face. Okay, here we go. Last one. You know, people praise this movie and its version of the tape for its bigger budget and being a more technically superior version compared to all the others. That's a chair. The evident digital effects here make this far less impressive or intimidating than the other ones. This actually just reminds me of early YouTube horror videos that were pretty popular back in the day. The only thing they got right was the mom killing herself and the well. The whole thing is nonsensical and drab. It's not as bad as the South Korean one because at least I can see what's happening here. This looks like it exists purely for the purpose of let's make a creepy tape, which isn't even really creepy. It has strayed so far. Way to enforce the stupid hypnotic concept. I actually wanted to praise this for keeping its attention on the single perspective, as if we were viewing like Rachel, but it's unfortunately far more uninteresting than the concept of we are supposed to be living this tape and its experiences shown here. The 7 days bit has to be the most stupid addition this movie made. We all know what it's time for. Ryuji. Let's see how American Ryuji compares to all the others.
What does this have to do with the tape?
Kinda gives me Breckenmeyer vibes. Oh yeah, remember how this movie just shoves everything in your face? This scene here is just insulting. Yeah, that's not on the nose or anything.
It was very student film.
Well, thank you, Noah, for pointing out the fundamental issue with this movie's version of the tape. This version of Ryuji isn't very interested in the situation, or the game as he would have called it. He tries to play things realistically as opposed to the original who thought the whole thing was fun and wanted to play. Yeah, this movie turns really into painfully generic Hollywood by this point. Interesting that they reversed the deductive skills here. In the Nakata film, it was Asakawa who pointed this out, whereas here it's Ryuji, or Noah, who isn't a professor in this one, I guess, but some kind of video tech analyst guy. And they definitely amped up the jealousy with the Mai character. I bet people making this movie had absolutely no idea how important this character was supposed to be. Filler! Rachel is able to track down the Oshima area due to the lighthouse in the tape, leading her to find Sadako's mother, who is a horse breeder. Okay, that's certainly different. We should take this point to go ahead and separate ourselves from Sadako. This is the Great Value version named Samara, who bears very little similar with Sadako outside of the tape killing people and island. This version of Sadako was adopted, so who knows who her actual parents are. She was raised by horse breeders, and when she got old enough for her powers to develop, she sent her adoptive mother to insanity with her ninja. That included killing a bunch of horses too. In this version, the mom kills Sadako before killing herself. Alright, okay.
You're gonna die.
Why does no one talk like a human in this movie? You know, as much as I despise the stupid camera gimmick, this scene is pretty neat. Although it leaves me wondering, can that girl also see what he sees? Because Noah definitely saw the effect on Rachel before he watched the tape, and Rachel, before watching the tape, saw it on the photographs of the teens. I don't know. What was the point of this scene? This definitely seems more like it belongs in a Ju-on or Grudge movie than this. Whew, this movie does not have confidence in itself. Nightmare on Elm Street? More filler. Noah, this isn't about your redemption or parental issues. This is not some rekindling love story. This is Rachel's, or Asakawa's story. More filler. Oh, look at that early 2000s CG. I feel the saddest for this horse than any human character who dies in this movie. Oh look, there's the bloody water from the tape. Noah getting the info on Samara's mother here is actually very Ryuji, and I greatly respect this scene, even if it makes zero sense. Wow, they talked Brian Cox into this movie. The film is definitely dragging way too long here, and I appreciate the effort to get more investigative with it, but it's lacking why it worked so well in the book. It's lacking these deep existential dialogues. It's lacking the suspense or tension. And they turned Sadako into an X-Files lab rat. Would you believe me if I told you the final act played out exactly the same as the previous 3 films? Well, that was unnecessary and looked like shit. They certainly made the TV scene look more convincing, although the minimalistic style of the '98 film still comes off as scarier. This one has too much glamour to it, and for some reason, it's incredibly brightly lit, and that's not very scary. But it looks cool, I'll give you that. Ugh. I like how Samara took the time to put his corpse on the chair just so we can have this silly Hollywood reveal. Yeah, the film's third act just really falls apart, from flashback on top of flashback to the film feeling like it yet again needs to spell everything out to us. And it's over. So those are the 4 major Ring adaptations, not including the absurd amount of sequels, spin-offs, and TV shows and whatever else. Those are all worth their own videos and discussions, although I really don't want to sit through rings. As promised, I will end this video by ranking the films. I'm not entirely sure if this is controversial because I don't know a single person that's watched this movie, but last place goes to Ring Virus. It's unfortunate, but this movie isn't that special. It's not really that awfully made. It is kind of a mess in the story, though, from both recreating the '98 film to trying to throw in book elements that were neglected. The thematic clash is too much, and the movie just seems to have a hard time finding its footing. And worst of all, we've already seen it. After that is Ring 95, which does pain me because it is the most novel accurate, but it's not a very well made film. Incredibly low budget and made for TV, but it's so ambitious and has a lot of cool things going on for it. I think first glance it's easy to think that this would be the worst version, but there's really some cool stuff going on. Unlike Ring Virus though, I would say this is worth checking out just for the fact that it is a different perspective on the story, though I definitely can't say it's for everyone. Bringing us to the big debate, something that has been argued about since their releases. Ring versus The Ring. The Ring has a high budget and is coated in Hollywood glamour. Some would even argue that it is the technically superior version, and in some regards, that's true. Ringu, on the other hand, was made with only $2 million budget. That's actually insane compared to the $48 million budget of The Ring. Ring does offer a more compelling story, more so in its focus on Sadako and her backstory, even if they did butcher it a bit and left out pivotal aspects of her character and conditioning. The movie also has the biggest sin of making Ryuji so damn boring and psychic. The American film, on the other hand, actually has more interesting leads, with Rachel and Noah ignoring the god-awful divorce subplot. At the same time, it has one of the worst iterations of Sadako to date, which is probably even more important than the characters who steer the story. Say what you will, I believe without a doubt that Ringu has far better cinematography, not only because it wasn't green the whole time, but it has some damn good compositions, pacing, and editing. The Ring has pretty good editing, I guess, but there weren't nearly as many moments as the '98 film that made me go, wow, what a shot. The pacing also drags a little too much, and filler did not help. So, ultimately, I'm going to give it to the '98 film. While as an adaptation it is somewhat revolting, it's still a pretty damn good movie on its own right. One that left a major impact on cinema. You could say the same for The Ring in opening more doors internationally and bringing more Japanese horror tropes to the West, for better or worse. It's really insane the legacy that these films left behind. It's no Cure or Pulse, that's for sure, but I think the simplicity of the story and how the filmmakers watered it down made it somewhat more accessible film for audiences to enjoy. Again, The Ring isn't that great of a film, but the marketing behind it was wild. They even aired the cursed tape on TV as promotion, and I think those are the elements that fans remember the most. Let me know which one of the Ring films is your favorite in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already, as it really helps my channel out a lot. As always, I'll see you next time.